You'll never speak English well, Mateo. It's just not for you, my cousin Carlos said with a mean smile. His words echoed in my mind. We were standing in the living room, my face flushed with embarrassment, as he mocked my broken English in front of the whole family. That day I decided something. I was going to learn how to speak English fluently, no matter how hard it got. Hello, I'm Mateo Garcia. I've been learning English since I was a teenager, and it's been quite the journey. In today's global world, mastering English isn't just a luxury, it's a necessity if you want to communicate and connect comfortably. I now use English daily, and it feels natural, but it wasn't always this way. In fact, English and I didn't get along very well at the start. The beginning was tough, full of struggles and frustration, but I always had a clear vision of myself speaking it fluently one day, and that vision kept me going. Like a runner pushing through the last mile of a marathon, I couldn't always see the finish line, but I knew if I kept going, I'd get there eventually. Today, I want to share my personal journey of learning English, the obstacles I overcame, and the valuable lessons I picked up along the way. I hope my experiences will help you in your own journey to improve the language. Let me take you back to my school days. Picture this. I'm sitting in class, and my English teacher, Mrs. Ramirez, is staring at me with wide eyes. Why? Because I had just confidently pronounced island as Island, as if the S had every right to be there. Yeah, I was that student. You see, I had been learning English for nearly 2 years, but it felt like the words were playing a game of hide and seek with my brain. They'd come in, but somehow, they never stayed. My English classes weren't much help either. To be honest, I felt like the whole school system had tricked me. I thought school was supposed to teach me things. Instead, I was more confused than ever. Mrs. Ramirez, with her thick Spanish accent, made every English word sound like Spanish. And instead of practicing real conversations, we spent most of the time repeating boring grammar rules and reading texts that even she seemed to hate. I felt like I was stuck in a language maze. My pronunciation? A disaster. Tenses? Forget about it. And don't get me started on phrasal verbs. Why did look up mean to search for something? Shouldn't it mean to look up? It felt like English was trying to trick me on purpose. Yet, despite all of that frustration, I was still determined to learn. Something inside me just wouldn't give up. I dreamed of speaking fluently one day, of having easy, flowing conversations without breaking a sweat. I even imagined myself walking through New York City, talking like a native. At the time, I couldn't see how it would ever happen. But deep down, I knew it would. Somehow. And guess what? It did. Now let me tell you how it all turned around. You're going to love this. Let me share the first thing I learned. Consistency is key. This brings me to lesson number 1. Make English a daily habit. Let me tell you the one thing that made all the difference in my English journey. I practiced every single day. Yes, every day. It might sound simple, but it's the biggest secret to learning any language, especially English. I like to think of it as the domino effect of language learning. The more you practice, the quicker everything starts to fall into place. When I first started, I set aside just 30 minutes each day. That's it. I wasn't trying to become an expert overnight, but those 30 minutes added up fast. Imagine this. If you practice 30 minutes a day, by the end of the year, you'll have spent over 180 hours learning English. That's a lot of improvement. The trick is to stick with it. Every single day, no matter what. Some days you'll feel like doing an hour, other days maybe just 10 minutes. That's okay, as long as you don't skip a day. Consistency is everything. Need a little extra push? Write yourself reminders. I used to have post-it notes everywhere. Practice English today. Don't forget your 30 minutes. It was like having my own personal cheerleaders in sticky note form. Now, I know there are going to be days when you really don't want to study. Trust me, I've been there. But here's a little trick I used. Just tell yourself to start for 2 minutes. That's it. 2 minutes. Once you get started, you'll find that it's a lot easier to keep going. Before you know it, you've finished your 30 minutes, and maybe even more. The hardest part is getting started, but once you make it a habit, you'll notice how much easier it becomes. Soon, you'll feel that progress building. And believe me, that's when things start to get exciting. Keep at it, and before you know it, you'll be speaking English with confidence. Lesson number 2. Get your pronunciation right from the day one. Ever had one of those moments when you confidently say a word in English and then someone gives you that look? The one that says, "What did you just say?" Yeah, I've been there too. It's like the time I proudly asked for a bowl of soap instead of soup at a restaurant. The waiter paused and I realized I had made a mistake. A bubbly mistake. So, how do you avoid these awkward moments? Simple. Focus on pronunciation from day one. It might sound boring, but trust me, this is where the magic happens. I learned this the hard way when my American teacher, Mr. Parker, kindly pointed out that my version of comfortable sounded more like comfortable, and I was convinced salmon had an L that needed to be pronounced. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. Mr. Parker's advice was simple but life-changing. Start working on pronunciation right from the beginning. English pronunciation is like a tricky puzzle, especially for a native Spanish speaker like me. Words like thought, though, and tough look like they should sound the same, but trust me, they don't. And vowels don't even get me started. For the longest time, I thought ship and sheep were identical. But Mr. Parker wasn't going to let me off the hook. He made me read out loud, correct myself, and practice over and over. It was embarrassing at first. I mean, who likes hearing their own voice making mistakes? But the more I did it, the better I got. I even started talking to myself in English. Yes, I know that sounds weird, but it worked. The key, Mr. Parker said, was to choose an accent, whether American, British, or Australian, and stick with it. I picked American since that's what he spoke, and I made it my mission to sound as natural as possible. I mimicked every word, every sound, until it started to feel less like a foreign language and more like native. Over time, things started to click. Words I used to trip over became smoother. My pronunciation improved, and soon enough, I was sounding more like the fluent speaker I had always wanted to be. So here's my advice. Don't ignore pronunciation. Start working on it from the beginning. Pick an accent and stick with it. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. They're part of the journey. Before you know it, you'll be speaking with confidence, just like I did. Lesson number 3. Learn in a balanced way. Just like a plant needs water, sunlight, and care to grow, learning a language requires a balanced approach. A language needs 4 important skills to fully develop: reading, listening, speaking, and writing. Every one of these skills matters. When someone says they speak a foreign language, we often assume they can also read, write, and understand what's being said to them. But learning a new language doesn't work so perfectly. It's different from how we learned our first language. As babies, we first hear people talking, then we start saying words, and only later do we learn to read and write. With a new language, it's not always that smooth. You might get really good at one skill, but struggle with another. For example, you might be great at reading English, but when it comes to speaking, it's a whole different story. Or maybe you speak fluently, but still make mistakes when writing. It's like following a recipe. If you only focus on one ingredient, like adding too much salt and ignoring everything else, the dish won't taste right. That's why it's so important to work on all 4 skills at the same time, especially in English. English has tricky spelling and pronunciation, so if you don't practice reading and writing early on, it's easy to get confused. When you practice all the skills, you start seeing how they connect. Writing helps with speaking, listening improves reading, and so on. You don't have to do everything every day, but it's good to mix them all into your weekly routine. Maybe one day you focus on reading, another day on listening, and so on. The great thing is there are fun, easy ways to practice, like watching shows with subtitles or reading while listening to audiobooks. You'll be improving 2 skills at once, and it doesn't even feel like work. Just remember, balance is key. Keep working on all 4 skills, and soon, you'll notice your English getting stronger across the board. Lesson number 4. Binge watch your way to better English. Let me tell you, movies were my secret weapon when I was struggling to learn English. I still remember the first time I watched The Avengers without subtitles. I was so lost. Tony Stark was throwing all these jokes and I was just sitting there like, what did he say? But I didn't give up. I started with movies I loved, simple ones like animations or action films where the plot was easy to follow. I'd watch them with English subtitles so I could match what I was hearing to the words. Over time, I noticed something amazing. I didn't need to pause every 5 seconds to understand. I could actually follow the dialogue. And the coolest part? I started picking up common phrases and slang that textbooks never taught me. Phrases like, "What's up?" or "You nailed it," started making sense in real conversations. I even found myself mimicking the way characters spoke. Because, let's face it, who doesn't want to sound cool like Iron Man? So, if you love movies, why not use them to learn? Start with 1 movie a week, something you enjoy, and don't stress about understanding every word. Just let the language sink in naturally. You'll be surprised at how much you can pick up. Oh, and pro tip, keep track of the movies you watch. Trust me, it's motivating to see your learning list fill up, and who doesn't love feeling accomplished while watching a good film? Lesson number 5. Track it to hack it. Now, I'm not the most organized person, but keeping a logbook saved me from feeling like I was making no progress. Let's be real. Learning a language can feel like you're walking through mud sometimes. You try so hard, but you're not sure if you're moving forward. That's where the logbook comes in. Every time I learned a new word or phrase, I'd jot it down. Not just the word itself, but how I learned it. For example, I once wrote, "Learned gorgeous," while watching Friends. Ross used it to describe Rachel. That way, I had a story to connect with the word. And trust me, it helps when you have a funny or personal memory tied to it. Over time, looking back at the words I wrote made me feel like I was really improving. I could see my vocabulary growing, and it gave me motivation to keep going. It's like when you start working out and don't see any changes at first, but then you notice your clothes fit better. It's proof that all the hard work is paying off. The logbook is your personal tracker for language gains. Lesson number 6. Stop studying, start speaking. At some point, I realized that English wasn't just something to study anymore. It had to become something I used every day. This didn't happen overnight. I remember one day after months of studying grammar, I got stuck in a conversation with a tourist at a cafe. I was so focused on remembering the right verb tense that I barely responded to what they were actually saying. That's when it hit me. Learning a language isn't just about getting every sentence right. It's about communication. So I stopped obsessing over being perfect and started practicing more in real-life situations. I'd speak to tourists in my hometown, join online forums, or even chat with English-speaking colleagues. The more I used the language, the more natural it felt. I still remember the first time I gave a presentation at work in English. My hands were shaking, but I did it. After that, I realized that the more I put myself out there, the easier it got. It's like riding a bike. At first, you're wobbly and nervous, but once you get the hang of it, you just go. So, don't wait until you feel ready to use English. Start now. Whether it's talking to a friend or writing an email, just use it. The more you practice, the more it will feel like second nature. Lesson number 7. Grow your English with real connections. This one is a game changer. When I first started learning English, I mostly studied on my own, but it wasn't until I started making friends who spoke English that I really saw my skills improve. I met Mike, an American guy living in my city, and we clicked right away. Hanging out with him was like getting free English lessons, but in a fun way. We'd grab coffee, talk about football, movies, or whatever was going on, and through those conversations, I learned how people really speak. He'd laugh at some of my mistakes, but he'd also correct me, which helped me get better. Plus, having a friend who spoke English meant I was practicing without even thinking about it. It wasn't just about the language, though. It was the culture. I learned how Americans joke around, what they talk about, and even how they express themselves. These are things you can't learn from a textbook. Building friendships with English speakers doesn't just help with fluency, it helps you understand the language on a deeper level. If you don't have English-speaking friends yet, don't worry. There are tons of ways to meet people online, through language exchange apps, social media, or even local meetups. I promise, having friends to practice with makes all the difference. And who knows? You might even end up with lifelong friendships that make the whole process so much more enjoyable. So, here's the deal. Learning English isn't just about hitting the books or memorizing words. It's about integrating it into your life. Watch movies, keep a logbook to track your progress, use the language every chance you get, and most importantly, build relationships with people who speak it. Before you know it, English won't feel like just another subject. It'll become a natural part of your daily life, woven into everything you do. And along the way, you'll have a lot of fun, you'll make great friends, and maybe even change your life in ways you didn't expect.
Your progress doesn't end here. To continue advancing your English skills, click on the next video or explore the additional videos we've thoughtfully selected for you.